You ready? Yes. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Bianca Emerson, and I'm the president of Colorado Black Women for Political Action. Thank you. And I'm so happy to be here with my partner for this evening, Natasha Gutierrez, the president-elect of the Sam Carey Bar Association. So I love that we are working together because there's power in numbers, there's power in unity. And so I'm really happy for this collaboration for this evening for our Attorney General Candidate Forum. How many of you know knowledge is power? And this is a part of what we have for CBWPA as Politics 101. And so what we try to do is educate the community, educate voters on what happens in our election system, what happens when it comes to elected officials, and what they actually do. But you know, this is a busy time for us in this country, in this state, especially for us here. We're voting for really important roles. So it's important that we know where the people stand who want to represent us in these spaces. And so before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the owners of this wonderful facility. Jennifer, thank you for opening up this space to us. We appreciate you. We plan on coming back again and again and again. So thank you again. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host tonight, Natasha.
And hello, everyone. I'm Natasha. And we at Sam Carey think it's so important for us to be in community with other Black organizations, and to, even though we're a legal organization, we are also a community organization. And our beginnings were with community and advocacy. So we want people who are going to advocate for us, and we want to hear what our candidates have to say. So we're so excited to hear from our two candidates. Two of our candidates canceled, so we have two, and we're happy to have them. And we're so excited to have, come on up, Michael Dougherty and David Seligman, who are going to tell us all about themselves. So our first question is to tell us about yourself. And then the second question is, explain to us what you see the role of the Attorney General for the state of Colorado.
Great, that's terrific. And how, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to come here today and to check in with you. This office is so important. It is so exceptionally important to our future here in Colorado, to fighting back against the autocracy that we're seeing from DC, and to fight for a better world than what we had before. It's really an honor to be with you all today. Thanks to Bianca, to Natasha. Putting together these forums is really hard, and it takes a lot of work. So I really appreciate the opportunity to check in with you all. First question is I'm supposed to just talk about me, which is great. We do a lot about that. We do a lot of that on campaigns, an uncomfortable amount sometimes. My name is David Seligman. I'm a workers' rights, civil rights, and consumer protection lawyer, executive director of the legal nonprofit Towards Justice. I'm the father of 3 little girls who are 11, 9, and 7. We live not far from here in Central Park, so I asked them to come and join, and they said, no way. They're done watching me do political speeches. So I said, this one is going to be especially entertaining, so I'll try to live up to that standard. I went to Harvard Law School. I clerked for federal judges, but I have dedicated every single day of my legal career to standing up in court on behalf of working people, taking on the biggest fights of their lives and winning. We've fought and won some of the biggest cases in the country over the last several years. Recently, in the United States Supreme Court, the 9-0 decision in a case I've been fighting for more than a decade on behalf of tens of thousands of people detained at the immigration detention facility in Aurora, taking on the Geo Group, the private prison company that owns it. I'm standing up in court for thousands of Amazon drivers right now, driving around Colorado, forced to urinate in bottles in order to meet Amazon's impossible quotas. I'm fighting for thousands of renters who rent from the corporate landlord Graystar, buried in junk fees, $100 a month, $200 a month. Fighting for teachers and for nurses, for veterans, for hundreds of thousands of Coloradans drowning in medical debt, to billion-dollar hospital systems like UC Health. I sued the Trump administration and won, and we've sued the Polis administration and won too. We recently stopped the governor from turning over Coloradans' personal information to ICE. I also want to tell you about a big win we had against the Polis administration just about a month ago. I don't know if folks remember, in 2018, you voted on a constitutional amendment called Amendment A to remove the penal exemption from our anti-slavery protections here in Colorado. The penal exemption, the racist stain in our federal constitution that has allowed involuntary servitude and slavery to persist in the prisons across the country. We removed it here in Colorado, but when we did, nothing changed. The world stayed exactly the same as it was before. Because so often, the laws on the books that are there to protect the powerless and hold the powerful accountable are just words on a page until we enforce them with courage and with boldness. And that's what I've been doing my entire career. We're very proud to win that case, a trial against the Polis administration. They can no longer force people inside our prisons to work under the threat of solitary confinement. This office is going to be absolutely essential to standing up to the threat of Trumpism, holding accountable not just him, but the corruption around him. That means prosecuting ICE officers when they trample our rights and federal officials who may try to steal our elections. And it also is going to mean fighting for a better future than what came before, taking on the AI systems of soon-to-be trillionaires that are spying on us and jacking up our prices, taking on the corporate landlords squeezing us dry, fighting corporate union busting. We can do all of that in the Attorney General's office. That's why I'm taking on this fight, and I'm really, it's really an honor to be here with you all, talking about what we can do and how we can make this office, build upon the work of Phil Weiser, make this office even stronger in the fight for a better future. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Michael Dougherty. I'm running for Attorney General of Colorado because we're facing the greatest threat to our democracy in my entire lifetime. That's why I'm running for Attorney General. And I'm so grateful to Bianca and Natasha, the CWBA, and the Sam Carey Bar Association for hosting this event for us as Attorney General candidates to come to get to know you better and for you to get to know us better, because this office, as Bianca said at the start, is incredibly important. When you think about the lawless Trump administration violating the rights of people all throughout this great country, the Attorney General is the one office that has the power to stand up against Donald Trump. That's why I'm running for Attorney General. That's why I'm here. I will say I had a fun start to my day. On Wednesdays, I take my son to track practice at 6:30 in the morning. And he came downstairs to head out the front door, and I was looking at my blue tie and my red tie. And he said, "Come on, we gotta go." I said, "I'm not sure what to wear. I have this candidate for him tonight, and I feel like Trump, among many terrible things he's done, he's made it difficult for me to wear a red tie." And my son said, "It's time to take back the red, white, and blue for America, Dad." And I said, "That is a great line." He's like, "You better not use that tonight." Because like David's kids, right, or no tie. Our kids go through this journey with us. And then my son hurried me out the door to take him to practice. But it's for him and for your kids that this office is especially important. When we think about our environment, civil rights, police accountability, Colorado's future, that's what we're here for. And right now it includes defending our democracy and the rule of law, because Donald Trump is destroying so much of what we stand for in this country. So when Donald Trump was being elected to a second term, my wife Antonia looked at me and said, "You are running for Attorney General." Because she knows the importance of having a proven track record as a fighter and a leader. And I'll tell you briefly about myself and how I ended up where I am today. So I'm the proud grandson of Irish immigrants who came over on the boat with nothing but the shirts on their backs. And they settled in Brooklyn, New York. And that's where I was born. And I grew up in a blue-collar family, a union family, so I'm proud of unions, and I know we need to do so much more in Colorado to defend our workers and protect our workers, and that's the kind of work I've done as a prosecutor and a leader throughout my career. But I went to community college coming out of high school because we didn't have much money. And I was loading trucks at UPS on the night shift to put myself through school. And if you came into the truck one night and said I was someday going to be the elected district attorney running for Attorney General, I'm not sure I would have believed it. But that's what this country is supposed to be about, that people get a fair shot and you work hard and you have opportunity. And that's how I've operated my entire life. And I had the good fortune of, after graduating from law school, getting a job offer from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. So I returned to New York City and I became a prosecutor there. I specialized in sex crimes and homicide cases. I handled the first hate crimes offense that office ever handled after the law passed in New York City. And I went on to become the deputy chief of the entire sex crimes unit overseeing 50 prosecutors on sex crimes cases, and then put in charge of the overall management of the entire office of 1,300 people. That experience matters because the AG's office has 400 attorneys working there. So leadership experience, particularly for lawyers, matters a lot. But I moved to Colorado to take over and lead a conviction integrity unit at the Attorney General's office. So I've actually worked at the Attorney General's office before. My family moved from Brooklyn, New York to Colorado to work on that conviction integrity project. Shortly after I arrived, I was put in charge of the entire criminal section for the Attorney General's office. So I've handled cases all around the state of Colorado. Homicides, public corruption, environmental crimes, human trafficking, election fraud, you name it. And for the past 8 years, I've had the honor of being the district attorney for Boulder County. And I've had to lead through times of crisis. And we are living through a time of crisis in this country right now. So I've led through the Marshall Fire investigation, finding Excel partially responsible for starting that fire and helping a $640 million civil settlement happen for all the victims in that case. I've led on the King Soopers mass murder case, which I handled myself. The Pearl Street firebombing from last summer is my case. So leading through times of crisis, but also being a leader on criminal justice reform. So I launched the first mental health diversion program in the state of Colorado to help address the glaring gap that we have. I followed Phil Turner's lead and fought to get the death penalty repealed here in the state of Colorado. We no longer have the death penalty in Colorado as a result of that work. And I'm really proud to have been a small part of that effort along with Phil and others. I also launched the first effort in the state of Colorado to identify racial inequities that exist in the justice system. And I invited in an outside independent organization to go through 5 years of data. Not to say if there are racial inequities, there are racial inequities, but to identify where they exist in the justice system in Boulder County. We publish that data on our website and we continue to work to improve the justice system. I launched the first Fresh Start warrant forgiveness program, giving people an opportunity to get back on track instead of cycling in and out of the jail. And I have robust restorative justice and diversion programs. But I'll end my intro with this, which is, as district attorney, I vigorously prosecute gun violence, but I also fight for legislative reforms to reduce the amount of gun violence that people have to suffer from. But this last piece, and it's a micro example of what I stand for, is this. My office is the first in the state of Colorado to work with nonprofits to purchase gun safes, because so many of the shootings we have in the metro area were stolen guns. So many of the teen suicides, which we have far too many of in the state of Colorado, are with stolen guns. My office passes out free gun safes to gun owners in Boulder County. I'm going to take that program statewide. A few weeks ago, I was outside the Boulder Community Hospital on a Saturday. We gave out 500 gun safes in 21 minutes. 500 gun owners storing their guns safely that night. That's what it means to not simply be hyper-partisan and just engaging in a rock fight with others on the other side, but to say, how are we going to improve community safety and well-being? That's why I was also selected to lead the Sentencing Reform Task Force for Colorado a couple years ago and completely overhauled and reduced sentencing for all misdemeanors and a lot of the felonies in Colorado. The justice system needs more work. Colorado's water, environment, and consumers and workers need more attention, and I'm going to fight for them. But also standing up against Donald Trump is what I'm ready for, just as I've prosecuted police officers in my career, firefighters, and elected officials, because no one is above the law. So when it comes to ICE, believe you me, I am going to hold ICE fully accountable when they commit crimes in the state of Colorado. And I'm going to stand shoulder to shoulder with you in getting private prisons banned in the state of Colorado. They're outrageous. And I think some of the things Trump is doing to our country, we have to look in the mirror in Colorado and recognize we can also make things better here at the state level, and that's what I'm going to do as your next Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you. Your water is right here. That's yours. That's yours. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. If you know what your water is, let's go.
I don't know.
Okay, our first question for tonight, and just so you know, these questions came from members from both of our organizations. So this came from the community that's going to vote for you. The first question is, the Trump administration and DOJ folks have attacked DEI. Recent videos showed that DOJ employees use ChatGPT to define what it is. How do you define DEI? And what efforts would you take to protect it in Colorado?
I think the core principle of DEI in my mind is to recognize that our institutions are fraught with all kinds of systemic racism, injustice, and bias, right? And those they impact our institutions and communities in all kinds of ways. And we need to take affirmative steps to counteract that, right? To build the world that we want. We need to be intentional about that work, right? Like that the thoughtlessly proceeding within the institutions and the norms that have evolved over the last several decades doesn't do the trick anymore. If we want to build diverse, if we want to build equitable, if we want to build inclusive communities, it's going to take the work. It's going to take the introspective work for us individually, and it's going to take the real policy work, building in the real frameworks to make sure that that we build truly inclusive spaces, recognizing that everyone coming in our doors, that all people, that they are burdened by the historical inequities that we see across our entire society, deep-rooted racism. One just example of this in my work that I always like to share is a case that came in the door several years ago for me. A woman came to our office who later became a client of our organization and led a really righteous case against a large employer. She had her commercial driver's license, and she said that the commercial driver's license should have qualified her for the job for this large institutional employer. But the employer said that she didn't qualify for the gig because she had too many points on her license. And so I looked at the points on her license, thinking that maybe they had to do with, violations for driving dangerously or something like that. I looked at the points on her license, and all of the points on her license were because she had been driving without an operating headlamp. One headlight was out. The thing about that is, the headlight on my Prius had been out for 3 years. 3 years. I've been driving around with one headlight for 3 years. And I had never gotten a ticket for it, ever. That's the world that we're living in. This black woman driving around had 8 points on her license, right? Because she'd been driving without a headlamp, and I had never even been pulled over for it. That's what we need to respond to. That's the point of DEI. We brought that case. We fought for her under disparate impact theory. Like, the policies of this employer were racist, even though on their face they were neutral. They resulted in discrimination because she had been experienced this disparate policing because of who she was, and we ended up prevailing in that litigation. I think that that's a good example too of the work that we're going to need to take on to protect DEI. We're going to need to hold accountable the institutions that are acquiescing, that are to the administration, right, that are giving up their DEI policies, and in many cases, in doing so, are violating state law, right? Like, we can hold them accountable under state law. But we also are going to need to go on offense, because right now, the Trump administration is dismantling many of our key anti-discrimination protections, especially our protections against disparate impacts, right? The laws on the books that are there to protect against policies that, while facially neutral, result in a disparate impact against people of color. The Trump administration has said we're no longer going to be engaging in enforcement of that theory of liability. It is absurdly dangerous, especially when that's the form that discrimination takes so often across our society. And so one of the top priorities of my office will be to make sure that we fill the gap and that we build out new, powerful, disparate impact theories and litigation to take on whether they be corporate employers or businesses in the consumer side, to make sure that that we root out discrimination in all of its forms, even when on its face it's neutral.
As Attorney General, this will continue to be a top priority for me, as it has throughout my career. And DEI programs, to me, are an important step in the right direction, but we have so much more work to do. But the Attorney General's office can play a critical role, and I promise you I will, in defending DEI programs and promoting them and lifting them up and advancing racial justice. The question that Bianca asked actually reminds me of a speech Robert F. Kennedy gave many, many years ago in South Africa. And he said, there's a country with a history of racism and racial violence and injustice and bias, and that country is actually the United States of America. And he was absolutely right, and he's right if he was saying it today. This is not just a history, this is the present. And DEI has been an important step in the right direction, and where Trump has tried to fight back against DEI, it's in a couple ways that the Attorney General has to play a critical role. One is Trump has tried to manipulate U.S. Supreme Court rulings on affirmative action and saying that DEI programs have been found unlawful and unconstitutional. That is blatantly false. So as your next Attorney General, I'm going to make sure people in Colorado, employers and public agencies, know that they should be proud and should be pushed to have DEI programs. It's why I have one on my website. If you go on the District Attorney's website tonight, you'll see our DEI program and what I stand for as a District Attorney. We need to be doing that statewide. The Attorney General also has power under the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act to bring actions against those that are committing racial bias and acts based on discrimination and racism. That happens all too often in the state of Colorado. That is our current life in Colorado, and it has to stop. And the Trump administration tries to put things in place to limit our ability to do that, including threatening to cut off funding for public agencies and public entities throughout Colorado. The AG's office can take Trump to court, and I promise you I will be, but we have to win those fights to protect Colorado, protect our values, and protect our funding. I look at, even in Boulder County, where I'm the district attorney, a couple of years ago, a sergeant at the jail tased a black man in custody out of anger and out of racism. I handled that case myself because it's so important that leaders stand up and show what we're going to stand for in our communities. And that sergeant from the jail was convicted, and he's no longer in law enforcement. And I've done that kind of work over and over and over again, because to me, it's a core value of who I am as a person, but who we're supposed to be as the United States of America. I told you my grandparents came here for freedoms and opportunities and instilled in me a love for this country, but it's that love of the country that makes me recognize we need to do so much better for so many others. And racism in this country, DEI programs are a step in the right direction, but racial inequities exist in every sector in the United States of America. And as Attorney General, it will be a top priority for me, and working on defending civil rights. And that's where the AG can and must play a critical role, especially in the face of the Trump administration and him empowering others to think they could violate civil rights all too often. And as your next Attorney General, I would have this to say to people: not on my watch. We're going to be really aggressive on the civil side and the criminal side anytime that happens. I promise you that. Thank you.
One of the things that you brought up, you said there are over 400 attorneys in the Attorney General's office, but there's about 640 total employees, I believe, in the Attorney General's office. And what is your experience when running a large staff? Because it's a management job. It's also, you're an attorney, but you're a manager of a very large staff. And how would you, as the manager of the Attorney General's office, ensure that you had a diverse workforce that included Black people?
That's a great question, because the Attorney General's office, if I say Attorney General, people often think of Phil Weiser. But there's hundreds and hundreds of people working under Phil Weiser, and it's a management position, but it's also about leadership. And to me, management and leadership are two different things. And leadership means inspiring the attorneys and all the staff, not just the legal staff, to stand and fight for what's right for Colorado, and to stand and fight for the rule of law. And having been a leader of hundreds of people at the Manhattan DA's office, as the head of the criminal section at the Attorney General's office, and having been district attorney of Boulder County, I've seen firsthand how important that leadership is for those hundreds of staff to pull in the same direction and win cases in court, especially on the issues we've been talking about here. And I think that's critically important. And to your point, when I took the position with the Manhattan DA's office, overseeing the 1,300 members of the staff, and this is in New York City, that office was not immune from a history of racism and a failure to hire at an equitable rate. So I started the diversity outreach program for the Manhattan District Attorney's office, recognizing that office could do better. We started high school pipeline programs for high school to law school to the DA's office. We did resume workshops, interview workshops, building a more diverse staff from the ground up, and then putting hiring practices in place to ensure we have a more diverse staff. The Boulder County District Attorney's Office is now a more diverse office since I've become District Attorney. And I promise you that's going to be my commitment as the next Attorney General for the state of Colorado. So it takes a really intentional effort. I recognize that from my experience. It is a top priority for me. I will say that as a prosecutor, as a young prosecutor, if I'm standing in court and I look around and everybody who's coming into the courtroom is a person of color and the people working in the courtroom are white, we are failing the communities that we serve. And I will never tolerate that in our justice system. And I never have as a leader and a prosecutor. So it's about having diversity amongst the staff and pushing for diversity throughout the justice system. And as your next Attorney General, I promise you I'll put those same practices in place and push other state agencies to do the same. The Attorney General is the attorney for all the state agencies. So the AG has a lot of influence over what we're doing in terms of hiring practices, promotional practices, and then defending those who are going through those promotional practices who face racism and bias in the process, who aren't getting promotions, who aren't being hired for reasons that are unacceptable. And the AG can, and I promise you I will, bring actions against those employers as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And first of all, on the management point, I agree with my friend Michael here. One of the most important jobs that the Attorney General is going to have, the next Attorney General, will be inspiring this office to every person in this office to take on some of the most important fights that we are going to have over the next several years. Right? This office is the future, the tip of the spear in many of the most important fights we're going to have for our future. We need to make sure that we are recruiting, that we are retaining, that we are inspiring the excellent staff that is already there to do the really important work of serving as the lawyer for the people of Colorado. I have turned my nonprofit organization Towards Justice into a national powerhouse in the fight for economic justice, for civil rights, for worker rights, and for consumer protection. And I've done it by making sure that all of the folks that work there feel supported, that they feel inspired, that they know that they can do the really exceptional work of fighting for our clients and the communities that we serve, right? And that's the same sort of philosophy that I'm going to take into the Attorney General's office, making sure that everybody in that office knows that they're supported, right? That they have opportunities to grow, that they have opportunities to thrive, making sure that they also know that they have the opportunity to exercise their own discretion, their own skills, lawyers and non-lawyers, always, of course, through the lens of the culture that I'm going to bring to that office, a commitment fundamentally to the notion that our law too often is rigged in favor of those with wealth and power. When it comes to maintaining a diverse office and building a more diverse office, I think this is exceptionally important. It's not just about box checking, right? This is like, we cannot serve as the lawyer for the people of Colorado if we do not reflect the people of Colorado, right? If we do not reflect the people and communities who need our support. This is exceptionally important. It is core to the work, core to the mission of the office. And this is work that I've been engaged in as a leader in the legal field for a very long time. I'll say that it can be really challenging. What we have found, and I think Michael spoke to this, is that it often what's most effective is recruitment early on, like for people who are in law school, even before law school, participating in programs that help people to understand that that there's a path in the law for them, and that there are many opportunities in the law to use the law to fight for the cause of justice, and to support them along that path through LSAT, through interviews, right, through all of the things that come along that can be really intimidating, especially for folks who don't have families that have already been lawyers and have been through this process before. I'll also say something that we've really struggled with at my organization is that recruiting and retaining a diverse staff, especially Black lawyers and non-lawyers, sometimes has been challenging because Colorado and Denver is not as hospitable as it should be to Black people and to Black communities. Like, that is a big part of the problem that we have had, frankly. So our commitment to building a more just society right here is also absolutely core to the project of building a diverse staff.
Thank you for that. So just keeping in the attitude and idea of diversity. When I was in law school, I was introduced for Black Alliance for Just Immigration. and I was a pro bono attorney for the organization. The organization focuses on prioritizing immigrants from African and Caribbean areas, and so often the narrative leaves out Black immigrants. So I want to know, what are you going to do to prioritize legal resources and advocacy for those immigrants that often aren't in the national narrative, that come from all over the globe?
I appreciate the question. It's something that we've run into in a lot of our work on behalf of immigrants, right? And including our litigation on behalf of immigrants here in Colorado. In many of our cases, our class representatives, the people we fought for, our clients who are immigrants, are Black immigrants. And I've heard this same concern before, right? That the advocacy and narrative around these issues fail to recognize their voices and experience. I think one really critical thing that we've done, and we need to do a much better job of, is making sure that there are language services there for all immigrants and not just for Spanish-speaking immigrants. We need to make sure that there is way better language services and access, of course, for Spanish-speaking immigrants. But we've got a lot of folks in Colorado who speak a variety of languages. I think we need to do more for all of them. And fundamentally, I think that we like the politics around so many of these issues, in my mind, is about building solidarity across these groups, right? So often, the tensions between and among these communities, they serve the interests of the folks who are oppressing us, And we need to build a politics, a big-hearted, expansive politics that recognizes that we have a shared goal to take on, the forces of oppression. So for me, it would be about what the work that I would do in this space is to make sure that we're working with diverse communities and diverse communities of advocates, and making sure that they all have a seat at the table, making sure that we're providing expansive and diverse language services inside the AG's office, and additionally, continuing to fight to build out a politics that recognizes that that everyone is in this fight alongside each other.
So thank you for the question. As your next Attorney General, a top priority for me is continuing to defend immigrants, but also doing exactly what you just talked about. And it's not only the work that I'm going to do, it's the work that I've been doing. So since 2018, in my office, we have an immigrant protection program. And we do a number of things as part of that immigrant protection program, including U visas that we provide to witnesses and victims of crime to help them with their immigration transition. We also do Know Your Rights trainings all throughout Boulder County, and now I do them throughout the state of Colorado. We have a plea policy in place for any immigrant that faces possible deportation as a result of criminal conduct, where deputy DAs in my office are directed to consider other possible outcomes to the case so that they don't face deportation as a result of their contact with the justice system. We were the first office in the state of Colorado to start that kind of program. It's important to also note that as part of our immigrant protection work, I was asked last year to join and help lead on legislation to expand immigrant protections all throughout the state of Colorado. So for example, for 7 years in Boulder County, we've had a policy in place that no member of law enforcement and no member of my office will ever ask an immigrant what their status is in the United States. And if we find out, which we often do, for example, if I'm interviewing a sex crimes victim, they may disclose to me that they have concerns about their status, we will never, and we have never, reported them to the federal government. Because I truly believe my job is about doing justice and standing up for our community, not doing the job of federal immigration officials. That's been true for 7 years. So last year I was asked to help get a bill passed into law here in Colorado that took that policy statewide. That's now the law for the state of Colorado. That law enforcement's not allowed to ask for status, and they're not allowed to report it to the federal government. That's the kind of work I promise to continue doing as your next Attorney General. It's why in about 2 weeks I'm receiving an award from the YWCA for my work to eliminate racism and empower women as an active ally in that fight. That's the kind of work I've been doing throughout my career. As your next Attorney General, there are some tools I have at my disposal for that, including bringing civil rights actions against individuals who fail to comply with the law in that regard, building more access to justice programs like we have in Boulder County. We need to take our access to justice programs statewide, because it's absolutely true to say that Spanish-speaking individuals should have access to the justice system, but it's more than just Latino community members that have to have access. To your question, Bianca, And in 2026, I think it's inexcusable with the technology we have that we don't have translation services available for every language in every courthouse in the state of Colorado. And I promise you we're going to work to change that. We've changed our forms in Boulder County. We've changed translators being available in Boulder County. We need to make the justice system more accessible to everyone, and not just for criminal justice, but for economic justice, environmental justice, for people trying to buy homes. They face so many obstacles that others do not, and I view that as a complete inequity, and it's a failure for us to accept it. And I promise you I'm going to continue fighting against it by taking some of the programs we have in Boulder County statewide, but also fully embracing the role of the Attorney General in fighting for marginalized and vulnerable communities. It's why I have the support, for example, of the Rocky Mountain Equality Action Fund. So my work that I've done in fighting for marginalized and vulnerable communities. I started the first hate crimes unit in the state of Colorado. I helped get the hate crime law in Colorado strengthened. I've brought hate crime prosecutions against those who violate the rights of others based on race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and so on. And I promise to continue doing that work as your next Attorney General and fully embracing it around the state of Colorado. Thank you.
In line with the access to justice issue that you brought up, many of us volunteer with Remain, which does immigration volunteerism. One of the issues that we've been experiencing is more and more children as young as 2 not being forced to represent themselves in immigration court. And of course, like Bianca said, we're having more and more African immigrants that are being affected, particularly because of the rhetoric out of Minnesota. Of course, this is federal, but what steps do you think you can do as the Attorney General to protect these most vulnerable people in the immigration system?
So I appreciate that question very much. There are things that as your Attorney General I can and will do. It's true, as Natasha said, that some of it is outside the ability of the Attorney General's office, so I want to be very candid with you about that. But I do think it's outrageous. It is crazy to me that if some guy broke this window and then was caught, arrested, and prosecuted, he would have the right to an attorney. But if that same guy was facing deportation, he doesn't have the right to counsel, and kids don't have the right to counsel. And to me, that is an absolute gross injustice in the United States of America. And I will continue to be really vocal in the fight for the federal government to change that and continuing to push partners in Congress to change that. The Attorney General's office has some power. One of the powers I want to expand upon in the AG's office is this. The state of California allows attorneys general to inspect ICE facilities, private prisons, and bring civil rights actions and criminal actions against ICE officers and these private for-profit corporations that exist that are running these facilities. I want to see that law introduced and passed in the state of Colorado. And the Attorney General, under my leadership, then having the ability, the power, and the responsibility to inspect private prison systems where we know people are being treated inhumanely and cruelly, and it violates the Constitution. Right now, those are walled off and shielded off from inspection and from justice. And we have to get that changed. Also, when it comes to young people being failure to be represented, one of the things we can do, and I should actually say this, I'm sorry, I really appreciate your service to Remain. It's an amazing organization. They do great work. I was just the keynote speaker for an immigration organization in Boulder County called El Comité. I think lifting up the work of those organizations, supporting volunteers, helping people in the community recognize how important those organizations are, and they're overwhelmed right now. When I do the Know Your Rights trainings around the state and I partner with these organizations, they are underwater in terms of the requests that are coming in for representation. So we need to continue to be champions for the nonprofits through volunteer work, but also pushing community members to support these organizations and giving them support through our work in the Attorney General's office. So the Know Your Rights presentations that I do because in Colorado, we actually have some really strong laws for immigrants, but they only work if people are aware of them and ICE is held accountable when they violate them. So I'll give you a good example. Mesa County Sheriff's deputy pulls over an immigrant on I-70 and then conspires with ICE to get her taken into custody on an immigration violation. Phil Weiser, the Attorney General, brought a lawsuit against the Mesa County Sheriff's deputy under the law we got passed last year. And that Mesa County Sheriff's deputy is no longer at the Sheriff's Department. He's no longer in law enforcement in the state of Colorado. That's what it means to have the laws in effect and hold people responsible for violating them. That's what's your question, Natasha. What happened in Minnesota, which was outrageous and horrific, to me it was maddening, because as a prosecutor who's held law enforcement responsible in my career for victimizing people, the federal government tried to deny local and state authorities access to the crime scene, access to the witnesses, and access to justice. And they should have stood up on day one and said, we're going to conduct a full investigation, and no one is above the law, and ICE is going to be held accountable for the crimes they commit. And I promise you, as your Attorney General, I'll do exactly that. Thank you.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And for those who've not been in immigration court, it's completely maddening and astonishing. And we've got kids, right, detained in these facilities by out-of-state billion-dollar corporations living in astonishing living conditions. I'm sure folks remember the case of Liam Conejo Ramos, the young boy with the Spider-Man backpack and the blue hat, taken away from his parents in Minnesota, sent to a detention center thousands of miles away because apparently he had the wrong paperwork. He couldn't stay with his family. He couldn't stay with his school in Minnesota. The wrong paperwork, outrageous, the wrong paperwork, and he ends up in detention. And, meanwhile, we've got the wealthiest people on the planet that are pillaging our democracy for their profit, and they're just getting away with it left and right. We have to do more to fight for people inside immigration court, and I would love to use the powers of our office, to leverage the power of the Attorney General's office to expand access to counsel inside that office and fight for more resources at the state level in order to fund that representation. It is outrageous that we've got a governor right now who is trying to spend $200 million on another private prison, right? When we've got kids right here, who don't even have access to counsel for the basic things, right? When they're living in these very often, across the country, living in these horrible detention centers. Part of it also, as my friend Michael referred to, is doing more to make sure that we take on the abuses inside these detention centers. I agree, we need more legislation to help us do that, to start to sharpen the tools. But we've got a lot of tools on the books, right now. We've got the tools right now. And if I were the Attorney General, I'd be, banging on the door at GEO, subpoena in my hand. Right, we need to get in there. We need to make sure the people in there are getting treated in accordance with state law. Right? We've been doing that work. I've been doing that work for many years in our case against the GEO group for more than 10 years on behalf of tens of thousands of people detained there, forced to work to maintain that facility under the threat of solitary confinement. We also need to do more to hold ICE officers accountable, right, if they trample our rights. We need to make sure that they understand that state law applies to them too. That's why we've had a billboard outside of the GEO detention facility, my campaign has, informing ICE officers that they are not above the law, that they can face prosecution when they trample our rights. It's absolutely essential that they know that. I've been saying that since before Minnesota. And third, and I appreciate Michael highlighting this point, we have to attack the suggestion that there are state agencies or local level law enforcement that may collaborate with ICE in violation of state law. That's what we did at my organization when we sued the Polis administration, stopped him from collaborating with ICE by turning over our personal information to ICE. My organization also just served a cease and desist letter on the Garfield County Sheriff, who's openly suggested that he's gonna, comfortable violating state law. We've heard the same from the El Paso County Sheriff, from the Teller County Sheriff. It's really important that they understand too that state law applies to them, that they are not above the law, that collaborating with ICE does not make any of us more safe. That in fact, it is an absurd threat to our safety. Thank you.
So as we continue to talk about juveniles and youth, Michael, you and I had a chance to talk when you came to the office about the juvenile justice system and how both of you know that it's changed from its original intent. Now it's more punitive. So right now in the state of Colorado, a federal class action lawsuit was filed by multiple nonprofits that allege that children in juvenile detention facilities here in Colorado are being held for weeks or months in violation of their constitutional and other legal rights. What are your thoughts related to that lawsuit?
Thank you. I have not read the lawsuit. It is. I pulled it up, and I intend to read it. I have not read the lawsuit, but I find the allegations in it astonishing and deeply, deeply concerning. And it's something that, as Attorney General, I'd intend to investigate and to take on. One of the most important tools that the Attorney General's office has is the authority under our pattern and practice authority to hold law enforcement accountable, to hold our correction system accountable when they violate our rights, our constitutional rights. That includes, yes, it includes sheriff's offices, police departments. It also includes state agencies too when they violate the law. The Attorney General is the lawyer not just for the agencies of the state, but for the people of the state. So when they're trampling our rights, the AG needs to hold them accountable. And I would, of course, be very interested in investigating this case and making sure that we root out the injustice here. I want to make a broader point about the punitiveness of our criminal legal system and our juvenile system in particular here. We have some of the worst funding in the country for mental, behavioral health, and substance use treatment. It is astonishing. In one of the wealthiest states, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, that we are not funding those kinds of services. The services which we know make people safe. We know that they work. That's what makes people safe. 1 in 4 teenagers has experienced a major depressive episode in Colorado. It is astonishing. We've got one of the highest suicide rates in the country. We have to do much more to invest in those services, to help all of our communities, to protect us, to preserve our safety. As your next Attorney General, I create a community health and safety fund that would collect the proceeds of enforcement actions that we bring against the corporate forces that are making us unsafe. The big tech companies reaching their tentacles into our kids' minds, the big oil companies polluting our planet. Take the proceeds from those cases and invest them in the things that we know keep us safe, right? The community-based support, the mental and behavioral health treatment, and substance use treatment that we so desperately need here in Colorado. Thank you.
I really appreciate that question about the lawsuit that's been brought against the juvenile detention facilities, and I strongly support the lawsuit. And I think what's important about that question, and something that really strikes me about where we are right now, is the Trump administration continues to commit terrible injustices and violate the Constitution and hurt people. And we stand up and we say private prisons should be eliminated. ICE should not have private prisons, and that's true. But we should also look in the mirror as a state and say, we have 2 private prisons operating at the state level. It is outrageous to me. You should never have for-profit corporations running any part of the justice system, because they're putting the money back in their pocket instead of in the care and treatment of those in their custody. These juvenile detention facilities, to Bianca's point, and she and I have talked about this in the past, and we share the same view, it has become more punitive. And what we've seen at these juvenile detention facilities is kids who have already been traumatized, who are being held in custody, are being victimized and re-traumatized by people who are supposed to be taking care of them. We all have an investment, each one of us, in helping kids who are going through the justice system. It's why I work with Voices for Children, who help abused and neglected kids who are going through the justice system. It's why I have a robust and leading juvenile diversion program in my office already. We divert more than 50% of all the kids referred to the justice system. We divert more than 50% of them out of the justice system without prosecuting them, and we do it successfully by meeting their underlying needs and figuring out what's going on and what brought them into the justice system. And quite frankly, I grew up in a neighborhood that was rough and tumble, and if every one of my friends who got into a fist fight, because of course I never did that, by the way, every one of my friends, I'm going to start confessing to things, so I'm going to just plow ahead here, but if every one of my friends got arrested for everything they did wrong, their lives would have been derailed. And we have over-policing our schools and over-incarcerating our kids. It's why I do a lot of work with formerly incarcerated individuals who were incarcerated as juveniles. So a couple weeks ago, I was at the legislature along with 7 now adult men who were held in juvenile detention facilities when they were younger. And they talked about, and I talked about how it changed lives and how it made it harder for them to return to society. And that's where I say we all have an investment in their care, and we can all do better for juveniles who are going through the justice system. First of all, it's the right thing to do, plain and simple, hard stop. It is the right thing to do. But secondly, they're coming back to our communities. We have that opportunity to help them get on a better track, not to put them in a cycle of going to the jail over and over and over again. And that's where we have failed these kids that have been in these juvenile detention facilities. And the other failure, quite frankly, I think the lawsuit's appropriate, but what I thought was a failure was the failure of state leaders to speak up when these things were discovered. If you go back and you look in the articles, for example, about Lookout Mountain, a juvenile detention facility in Jefferson County, here in the metro area, look to see what the leaders in state government said about those facilities. I certainly didn't see anything. And I promise you that I strongly believe the governor has to step up and say, we can't allow this, we can't tolerate it, I'm not gonna stand for it. And that's how I'm gonna operate as Attorney General, because we have to invest in our kids and treat them appropriately and properly. They are our future. And I see kids through my work with abused and neglected kids who deserve another chance to go on to have a great, great life. That's why I have that juvenile diversion program. That's why I do all this work with individuals who are in the justice system to help them get on a better track. That's where we have to improve as a justice system, and identifying what trauma brought them in the first place. And as your next Attorney General, I'm going to lift up those programs, and I promise you I'm going to hold juvenile detention facilities accountable and make them more for rehabilitation and less for punishment. Thank you.
It's the right answer, Michael. So now we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. I know that Yarkenda, who's the Executive Director of Justice for Black Coloradans, has a question. So can you please ask your question? Thank you.
I can hear you. Okay, good. So the Colorado Black Equity Study will be delivered to the Attorney General's office in 2027. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that's better.
Oh, okay. So I get the pleasure of leading the Colorado Black Equity Study, and we are going to deliver that report to the Attorney General in 2027. So my question is, how would you use your seat to hold state agencies, private actors accountable when policies or practices are proven to actually produce racially disparate outcomes for Black Coloradans? And then can you also talk to me a little bit about how you're going to define accountability around that? Because in the Colorado Black Equity Study, we're really looking at the historical harms that have happened to Black Coloradans from the inception through today. So the ongoing harms as well. So I would love to hear your insight, because the General Assembly will actually deliver it to the Attorney General's seat. So I would love to hear more your insight on that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm sorry, what was your name? I didn't. Yarkenda. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the question. As your next Attorney General, I'll be eager to receive the equity study and use the authority of the office to address so many of these issues. Speaking to the first question and referring back to an answer from that I gave earlier, one of the most important tools that the Attorney General's office has is to enforce our laws, our civil rights laws, and our anti-discrimination laws. Right now, one of the core features of those laws is being gutted by the Trump administration, which is the prohibitions against disparate impact. Policies on their face that appear neutral, but in fact result in harm to people of color, right? We see it all the time. That's very often the shape that discrimination takes, right? As we see inequities reflected in our modern systems especially based on historical inequities. It's becoming even more of a problem now in the private marketplace, frankly, as a consequence of AI, right? As more corporations use AI to screen people for jobs, to screen people for healthcare. Well, AI is trained on centuries and centuries of discrimination, right? It's BS discriminatory stuff in, and it's BS discriminatory stuff out. This is why my organization has led in bringing some first in the nation lawsuits to challenge the AI systems that result in discrimination, especially discrimination against people of color in accessing jobs and accessing really essential things in our lives. one of the core priorities that I'll have as your next Attorney General will be robust enforcement of our disparate impact laws. And we're going to have to build those laws out here in Colorado. We're going to have to refine them even more through legislative reforms and then enforce them aggressively. And that's something that I'm committed to do. And also, as you point out, this isn't just about taking on the corporate and discrimination. It's not just about addressing these problems in the private sector. It's addressing the ways in which these problems show up inside our public agencies, including at the state level. And the Attorney General, as I said earlier, is fundamentally the lawyer for state agencies, but fundamentally our core responsibility is to the people of Colorado. So we're going to have to work, yes, in conjunction with state agencies to root out discrimination. And sometimes when they're not doing their jobs and they're not, they're not upholding the law and, the commitments that we've made here in Colorado, yes, the Attorney General can hold them accountable, and we're going to have to. We're going to have to do that. I forgot the second part of your question. How do you define accountability? Great question. Something that I think I think about all the time as a lawyer in addressing systemic oppression and discrimination. Fundamentally, accountability isn't only about identifying the harm, identifying the historical inequities. It's about what happens next, right? It's about change, It's about making sure that our policies moving forward reflect and recognize the discrimination that has happened in the past, and that we do something to address it, right? Make sure, and that will mean, yes, it will mean putting a thumb on the scale and making sure that we address those problems and make sure that we have the funding in place to provide services that people have been denied historically. Fundamentally, I think accountability for me too often involves, or the way that people think about accountability too often involves just like recognizing harm. We're going to need to make change here. We're going to need to make change, and there needs to be real metrics for what that looks like that we can all hold ourselves accountable to.
I look forward to receiving that study, and I think it's an important step for 3 reasons. First, to drive positive change that is desperately needed. Second, to make victims, and I view them as victims, whole. And third, to hold bad actors accountable. So for those 3 reasons, I think that study is going to be an important step in the work we're doing. The study will also contain data, from what I understand, and that data will help us drive change. And I look at, for example, when I brought in an outside independent agency to look at 5 years of data for the Boulder District Attorney's Office, they allowed us to see where we have racial inequities in the system and address them head on. So it wasn't simply saying, does racism exist in the system? I think everyone here would raise their hand and say, yes, certainly I would. But how you get after it, attack, and get rid of it, the data helps with that. So it's why if you go on my website tonight, if you're hanging out later and you're wondering what you should do, and you decide, I'm going to check out Michael Dougherty's website. You go on the DA website, in all seriousness, we have all our data broken out by race, gender, and ethnicity. We share it with the public because it's about owning responsibility for it, but also driving change through the data. And I think that data will be really important. So how do we hold state actors, to your question, and private actors accountable? The Attorney General has a tremendous amount of authority over state agencies because the AG is the attorney, first and foremost, for the people, but also for state agencies. So the AG can drive a lot of change with those state agencies and take legal action against them if they fail to change. But also private actors under the Civil Rights Authority within Colorado and the Anti-Discrimination Act within Colorado, the Attorney General's office can and should be doing more. Not because Phil Weiser's failed to do so, but because Trump is making it so much more difficult for the federal government to play any role in any of this. So Trump is rolling back civil rights protections, rolling back the Department of Justice Civil Rights Unit. I'm going to step up and do even more as your next Attorney General because the federal government is going to fail us in every respect on that. It's also about pattern and practice actions. So for example, the Aurora Police Department is currently subject to a pattern and practice action that Phil Weiser's office brought against it. And to me, that's the tip of the iceberg. There are other agencies out there that are engaging in pattern and practice discrimination and bias and have to be held accountable in court and have to be pushed to change. But one thing I think is really important about your question, I think you're also asking, what do you do about the people who've already been negatively impacted? And I think it's about financial compensation and looking to see what we can do to lift them up if they've been oppressed through bad actors at the state agencies or in the private corporations and private sector. And as your next Attorney General, that study is going to help drive me in that work. And the last part that I want to stress is I'm not going to wait for that study to work with you and for you. So before, during, and after that study comes, I am going to be working with leaders in the Black community and other communities to make sure that I'm listening and taking action as Attorney General. So we don't have to wait for the study to come to start that work together. I promise you that'll always be my approach.
We have a question online, and then Anna has a question. Okay. From Casey Dawn, what will you do as Attorney General to hold police officers accountable when district attorneys don't?
So first, I want to stress that throughout my career, I've held police officers accountable. So this is one of those many questions that it's not just what I'm going to do in the future, but I ask you to hold me to account for my track record as someone who's going to never allow people to escape justice, including police officers. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. First, I was in downtown Manhattan on 9/11, actually about to start a robbery trial. I was going to give an opening statement when the first plane hit a few blocks from the courthouse. And I didn't try that case that day. But fast forward a couple months later, a police officer on patrol smashed a person in the face, a person of Middle Eastern descent, in the face with his radio and broke his nose, just purely out of anger and retaliation. The victim had done nothing wrong. I handled that case myself. It went to trial, and the police officer was convicted, held accountable, and is no longer a police officer. That's the kind of work I've done throughout my entire career. I mentioned to you earlier the Black man who was in custody at the Boulder County Jail, that I handled that case myself. Right now, my office is prosecuting a paramedic who killed a person in police custody. That case is pending in my office right now. A couple of years ago, I prosecuted 2 sheriff's deputies who killed a young man in their custody. They're both in state prison as we have this conversation, because no one is above the law. That is my track record, and that is my commitment. And when district attorneys fail to live up to that obligation, I will make sure that I take action as Attorney General. I look at what Phil Weiser's office did with Elijah McClain, for example, where the district attorney completely failed to live up to his responsibility to Elijah and his family and the community, and the Attorney General came in and prosecuted that case. And he had great prosecutors on that case. One of them now works for me in the district attorney's office. So it's about making sure the AG can step up and bring action when district attorneys fail to do so. But also it goes back to what I said about pattern and practice orders against law enforcement agencies. Aurora PD, as I mentioned, is the one in the state currently. There will likely and definitely be others, and it's a matter of having an Attorney General who's willing to get after it and has a track record of doing so and making sure that we truly have racial justice. That requires us to stand up against district attorneys and stand up to others who are failing to do exactly that. I've done this throughout my career, and I promise you, as Attorney General, it's going to be a top priority for me. Thank you.
It's really exceptionally important that we do everything we can in the Attorney General's office to hold police officers accountable when they violate our rights, when they cause harm. The Attorney General has to step in, and I would, especially when district attorneys fail to do that work. It's not just about prosecuting police officers, and although that may need to happen, unfortunately. In addition to that, we need to use all of the levers we can in that office to build out law enforcement across the state that advances the interests of public safety, works with community. And there's lots of tools. There's the post-certification program. We need to make sure that we're identifying officers that are not doing right by their communities, where we see repeated problems, that we're doing what we can to make sure that they don't maintain their jobs anymore, that they can't work anywhere else in Colorado. And I agree with my friend Michael's point about using the pattern of practice authority of this office to root out systemic problems within police departments when they come up. Aurora is not the only problem. The Aurora Police Department is not the only problem that we have here in Colorado. And even for the Aurora Police Department, although I think the consent decree is a really important step and was the consequence of some really powerful and righteous and exceptionally important activism here in Aurora, let's be honest, several unarmed Black men have been killed by police since the consent decree came into place, right? We need to look at what more needs to be done, right? What more teeth may need to be put into it, how we can work in conjunction with the police department, in conjunction with communities, to make sure that that people actually have the confidence that they're going to be protected right here in Aurora.
Miss Anna?
Thank you both for being here today. I am really excited that you came. I know we had 2 other candidates that canceled, so it's really meaningful that you are here. My question for you both is, having followed a lot of the candidates that are on the Democratic ticket really for the AG, how do you perceive that your philosophies differ from each other or the other candidates as well? It's hard as a voter sometimes when I see multiple candidates for a position, there's not a lot of daylight between them. I mean, that's also sort of the issue about being in the same party, but can you help us understand, do you have a philosophy that you would try to implement as part of being the AG and some of the mission that you would want to change or alter, or what makes you, I guess, different than the other candidates that we can all understand how to distinguish really between both of you, since your policies, I think, are pretty close?
Thank you. Sorry, what's your name? Anna. Anna, thank you so much for the question. Totally agree. And I'll say, speaking about Michael in particular, I think that we do have a lot of overlapping and shared philosophies and shared values. And I've learned a lot from him during the course of the campaign. We've had these sort of opportunities to hear about how he sees the world. And that's helped to inform my thinking here. That's one of the beautiful things about this campaign. I think that we all have a shared interest in taking on the Trump administration and making sure that we continue to use all the tools of the office to stand up to the outrageous threats of the autocracy that we're seeing right now from DC. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. And I think that we may have some differences of priorities. I'm deeply concerned about the proliferation of AI systems across our economy, the ways in which we're being spied upon by flock cameras and algorithms to drive up our prices, to drive down our wages. I'm deeply concerned about the threats to our labor market as a consequence of that, of union busting. I'm deeply concerned about how we use all the tools of this office to fight for a fair economy after Donald Trump. I'm not saying that Michael Dougherty doesn't believe all those things. I'm sure that he does. With respect to what sets us apart here, one thing I'll say, with so much respect for Michael Dougherty's experience and for the legal experience of the other candidates in this race, I'm the only candidate in this race who's dedicated every single day of my career to representing people, human beings who are frightened, human beings who are screwed over, human beings who are scared. Thank you. And helping them take on some of the biggest and most important fights of their lives, right? I think it matters. It matters that I have the experience of walking with a young woman into a deposition on the 20th floor of a law firm in downtown Denver, knowing that she's never been in a building that high in her life, right? Knowing that she's accusing her boss of sexual harassment, knowing that she's going to confront a corporate lawyer who's going to berate her and suggest that she's lying, right? It matters that, that I know what it's like to receive a call from a client, like we did several months ago, who said that her boss told her that the next time she asks for her paycheck, she'll get a bullet in the head and a call to ICE. Right? It matters that those are the experiences of my clients. Those are the people that I fight for. Those are the people that I stand up in court for, and that I've helped to lead, that I've worked alongside to lead some of the biggest legal fights in the country. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I also want to share mutual respect with David. And when he says my friend Michael and I say my friend David, that's honestly how we feel. And there's definitely respect there. And you don't hear this in enough races and from enough candidates. So I really enjoy this very much. And I feel great for Colorado that you have qualified candidates running for Attorney General. It's so important. It really is so critically important. So I'm not just saying that because I'm in front of David here with all of you. I was on the phone with a delegate who's going to be at the State Assembly on the way down here. And she said, tell me how you're different than David Seligman. I said, I have a tremendous amount of respect for David, and he does great work. And I'm not going to ever say a negative thing about him because I think very highly of him, and he'd be a great attorney general for the state of Colorado. So right now, my campaign team might be watching saying, why are you saying that? But it's true. It's true. What it comes down to is what this moment calls for. And I do think there's some distinctions between us in terms of priorities and philosophies. One thing I'll share with you on the experience side is I've been standing in front of courts for 29 years saying, I'm here on behalf of the people. And that's been on some of the most serious consequential cases we've had in Colorado. Just recently, the Pearl Street firebombing, the King Soopers mass murder. So I respond at times of crisis and I lead people through to justice. And that's what I've done time and time and time again. And you thanked us, Anna, for being here. I think being the people's lawyer means you show up. And that's what I've done all throughout this campaign. Thank you. I've done it as district attorney, where we've built a lot of trust in the justice system in Boulder County, which is a somewhat skeptical community about the justice system. We've built a lot of trust in what we do because we're out in the community all the time answering questions. And it's why, as a candidate, I've traveled over 16,000 miles since starting the campaign, just on weekends alone, because it's about getting out to local communities and recognizing in Colorado, we have diverse interests and issues. If you're on the Western Slope, the first question they ask me about every time is water. What's my position on water? How much of a priority is it going to be for me as your next Attorney General? And in the metro area, it's about community safety and affordability and other issues that we've talked about here as well. But I think being the people's lawyer means showing up. And it's going to be how I always operate, not just as district attorney and as a candidate, but as your next Attorney General. So I think that's really critical. And that's how I've operated as a public servant for my entire career. I'm the one candidate who's been a prosecutor and a leader at the Attorney General's office. So I've been at that leadership table, and I know how important and impactful that office can, should, and must be. And I've prosecuted cases all around the state of Colorado. And I also recognize that people outside the metro area don't believe elected officials for Colorado do enough to support them or listen to them and help them. And quite frankly, they are right. So as the next Attorney General, one of the things I promise to do is give staff of the AG's office the privilege of working elsewhere in the state outside the Denver metro area. So still making the salary they have at the AG's office, but having the opportunity to live in the community they serve, to fight for water, fight for civil rights, fight for public safety, help with fentanyl and opioid issues, but doing it in the communities they're living in, not just from a leather chair in Denver, and making sure we're doing everything we can to lift up local communities. That's what I promise to bring to the Attorney General's office. And I think in terms of priorities, David and I share a lot of the same views. And I mean it when I say I have a tremendous amount of respect for this guy. I do. And in fact, on the way down here, I also called my wife, who said, who's going to be at the forum tonight? I said, David. She's like, oh, that's great. Because she knows, even though I'm not home and I'm missing time with my kids, as is David, she knows that we get along really well and there's mutual respect there. And that's true with other candidates in the race too. I think what's great about having multiple candidates is it means Democrats have seized control of Colorado, quite frankly. It means we are a blue state, so we have contested primaries and you may have more tough choices. But I would take that any day of the week, given what's at stake for our country. And I promise you, when it comes time to stand and fight against Donald Trump, the key part of that, candidates up and down the ticket will say they're going to do it. We have to win those fights. It doesn't help if we take Trump to court and we lose. We just lose the taxpayer funds and the trust of the communities. So we have to win the fights against Donald Trump, and that's what I'm ready to do on day one. And thank you for that great question.
Thank you. Speaking about another lawsuit was filed in October 2025 against Adams County, commonly called the Right to Hug, for banning in-contact visits in favor of paid video visits, which cost anywhere from 20 cents to 40 cents a minute. So my question is, what are your thoughts in regards to that? And then following up on that also is, we talked about the fact that the Attorney General represents a lot of state agencies as well as like the people of Colorado. But what do you do, or how would you resolve situations where your principles and values conflict with the governor's?
Thank you for that question. And this is a good example of where private corporations should not be involved in any part of the justice system. So if you know someone who's in custody, and I have a cousin who's in custody, when I go to email my cousin, I have to pay them for me to be able to send the email. And then I got to put money on his book so he can email me back. That is a barrier for so many people. And people who are incarcerated deserve the opportunity to have contact with those that they love. Physical contact, not just video, and not just paid corporations making a profit off the backs of the people who are in custody. We need to get that changed in Colorado, and I promise you I'm going to fight to do that. To me, it's about making the justice system more equitable and more fair and just more just. And we fail when we have things that prompt that kind of lawsuit, for example. So I strongly agree with the position you just hit on, and I think we have to do that. As your next Attorney General, I'm committed to doing it. The second part of what you said was the governor. Oh, yes. So thank you. I think David and I will agree on this one as well. But to me, there's two things about this. First, the Attorney General is an independently elected official. I take that responsibility very seriously. To me, I am the attorney for the people first and foremost. I am the people's lawyer. I'm going to fight for what's right. I hope the governor agrees with me, but regardless of whether he or she does, I have a job to do as your Attorney General. Nothing will change my course on that. And the governor has no authority over the Attorney General. The Attorney General also has the legal obligation to serve as the governor's attorney when the governor is sued, if the Attorney General believes the governor has acted in a lawful manner. So the AG doesn't have to do it. So for example, if an organization like Towards Justice brings a lawsuit against the governor, David's organization, the Attorney General doesn't have to represent the governor. And I will only do so when I believe the governor has acted in a constitutional manner. I've been an outspoken advocate for what I believe in and what I stand for, including standing up against Governor Polis and calling him out for things like Tina Peters. As the months tick by, right, if he releases Tina Peters a day early, it's an absolute miscarriage of justice. Do you agree with me on that? Yeah. She was convicted in Mesa County, a largely Republican county, largely Republican jury. She was convicted justly and fairly, and the fact that she has a political crony in the White House should not allow her to get early release from our governor. Thank you. I recognize that the President of the United States has threatened harsh measures against Colorado if she's not released immediately, which made me think I was reading about some third world country in a faraway place where the president threatens people with retaliation if she's not released. And he has done that. He cut off funding he vetoed a bill that was going to bring funding for clean water to southeastern Colorado. Even Representative Boebert spoke out against the president. I thought, I'm living in the twilight zone here where she's saying put people above politics. It's crazy. But that's what it means to be Attorney General, is standing up for what's right. The governor releasing Tina Peters early would be an absolute miscarriage of justice. And as district attorney, I've been very outspoken about this all along. That case was prosecuted by a Republican DA and our current Attorney General, Phil Weiser, a Democrat. And that was a bipartisan effort to fight for justice. And quite frankly, if the governor says Tina Peters should be released because the sentence should be shorter, then he sure as hell better be looking at everyone else's sentence in state prison. She shouldn't get special treatment because of who she's connected to. We are all sick and tired of a two-tier justice system where Epstein, Tina Peters, and others are treated differently because of who they know and how much money they have in their bank account. And I have never, and I will never tolerate that in the United States of America. It's antithetical to the justice system. It violates every moral fiber of my being. So if the governor does it now, or the future governor does it, and I believe the governor's making a mistake, I'll be very outspoken and direct with the governor about it, and then with the community about what's happening and why it's wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I support the right to hug litigation, have worked on that litigation. It's astonishing. It's astonishing that right here in Colorado, we're depriving people of their basic humanity, basic things like contact with their family members, contact with their communities. It's astonishing. It's why we also worked in the legislature last year during the course of our fight in the Amendment A case, the anti-slavery case, for a legislative reform that would ensure that DOC can't deny people the right to hug, the right to contact with family members because they refuse to work for the Department of Corrections. That had been the case for far too long in Colorado. Blatantly illegal in my mind. Speaking to the other aspect of your question, right, which are how you've got these corporate entities profiteering off of these absurd injustices within our criminal legal system. There's a lot that the AG can do in those contexts too, not just using our civil rights laws, but using our anti-monopoly laws, our consumer protection laws, right? This isn't like a market operating fairly, not by any means, right? They're exploiting an absurd amount of power with literally a captive market to exploit for their own, for an extra buck, right? And there are companies that are making billions and billions and billions of dollars off of the injustices that we see across our criminal legal system. We're going to have to do more to hold them accountable. Absolutely. When it comes to standing up to the governor, I agree with my very dear friend Michael's point. Of course, we represent state agencies, but we're fundamentally the lawyer for the people of Colorado, and that relationship and my philosophy on the relationship with the governor, I think, would manifest in several ways. First of all, not being afraid to call the governor out publicly. For example, when he's trying to suggest that he might commute Tina Peters, or when he's vetoing legislation like the Worker Protection Act, which would have made it easier for workers to unionize here in Colorado, which is absolutely absurd that he did that. I want to point out something that I think is really remarkable about the Tina Peters case, is that we've got a governor right now suggesting that he thinks that Tina Peters' sentence may be too harsh. This is the same governor that vetoed legislation last year that would have ensured that municipal courts can't sentence people more harshly than state courts, right? So all of a sudden all of a sudden, he's concerned about harsh sentences. Like, where was he on that legislation? Where is he time and time again in failing to show up and support efforts to advance a more fair criminal legal system? The other thing is that, yes, it is true that the Attorney General's office can refuse to defend the state in litigation where the state has violated the law. Hopefully that doesn't come up very often. But if it does come up, I would not be afraid to refuse to defend the state in litigation, even in cases where there is a plausible argument that the state has behaved lawfully. Far too often, what we see in the Attorney General's office in civil rights cases, for example, brought against the state, is the culture of defending at all costs, right? The suggestion that the role of the Attorney General's office is to win trials, right? That's not the responsibility of the Attorney General's office. It's not to win trials, it's to advance the cause of justice. So very often, that's going to mean working collaboratively to resolve cases early, right? To resolve cases early, to address injustices, to make sure that people are compensated for them, even when it's the state that's done wrong. But as I think my career has shown, suing Governor Polis, I think several times, and winning many of them, I'm not afraid to stand up to the governor when I don't agree with him. Thank you.
We have another question online. Jasmine Ross said she wasn't sure if this question was asked, and it wasn't, sort of, but what specific measures will you advocate for to reform sentencing guidelines in order to reduce disparities that result in longer sentences for BIPOC individuals compared to their white counterparts? And as a follow-up, how will you ensure that these reforms are effectively implemented and monitored over time?
It's a really important question, and I think part of it is being introspective within the office about the cases that we're prosecuting and what sentences result from those, and listening to community about those cases. So there's not many cases, obviously, that the Attorney General's office is prosecuting directly, but there are, it does come up, and there are several of them. I've engaged recently with community of concerns, for example, about insurance fraud prosecutions from the office. We want to take a hard look at those and make sure that we don't see sentencing disparity in those, that all of those cases are cases that should be brought. And then also using the convening power of the office, the bully pulpit of the office, to advance policies that are fair, not only at the legislature, but to work collaboratively with prosecutors' offices across the state, with courts across the state, and to be data-driven in that analysis, and to make sure that courts are held accountable, right? That they're seeing how these disparities arise, and we want to make sure that the Attorney General is a partner with community in addressing these disparities, in highlighting them, and exposing them, so we can build a criminal legal system that is that's more fair and that's more just.
So Jasmine, thank you for that question, and it's something that I'm passionate about, sentencing reform in Colorado. So as a result of my work as a progressive prosecutor and leader over the years, in 2020, 2021, I was put in charge of the Sentencing Reform Task Force for the state of Colorado. And we looked at every criminal offense on the books, starting with misdemeanors. And we changed the entire sentencing structure for misdemeanors in the state of Colorado and reduced the penalties for all the misdemeanors. And then we started doing that work on felonies, and I'll give you one good example of a felony that we changed with equity in mind is around sentencing for auto theft. So it used to be based on the value of the car. How much the value of the car was would determine the sentencing range the person faced. So what that means is if you're driving your 95 Nissan Stanza and it's your one car and you're dropping the kids at school and then heading to the first of your two jobs and that car gets stolen, it is devastating, but the penalty was less under the law than if you go to Phil Turner's house and he has the 4 Teslas outside and you take one of them, I'm just kidding, but you take one of the Teslas. What I'm not kidding about is the sentence for the Tesla was more than for the Nissan Stanza. That's, as a matter of fundamental fairness, a failure for Colorado. So I worked hard, along with other members of the task force and the legislatures, to get the law changed so that now those are all equal. But it's also doing what I've done in Boulder County as district attorney, which is opening our books and requiring every district attorney's office and state judicial, which in a lot of ways still remains a black box, in terms of the data being available to people in the community. You could look at the data from my office broken out by race, gender, and ethnicity. Every DA's office in the state should have that data available to community members. We should also require state judicial to do the same thing. So you can't go on the Denver judicial website right now and find out what are the sentences black people have received and compare to the sentences white people have received. And in 2025, 2026, to me, that's just an absolute failure. There's no reason for that. We need to change that. We also need to put changes in place on the policing level to make sure we're capturing all that data and addressing that data. Because with that data, we can identify the inequities that exist in jurisdictions or in particular criminal charges and then get after it. So 2 examples I'll share with you where I've seen that around the country. One is in Chicago. They tried to reduce gun violence by making penalties harsher if you committed a shooting in a housing project. Now, the fact of the matter was a lot of communities of color are living in those housing projects. So they were getting hammered with sentences. So it was out of good intentions, an attempt to reduce gun violence, but a terribly disparate impact and a racial injustice where I've seen that happen in other parts of the country. We have to use the data to inform what we're going to do in Colorado to make the laws more fair and sentencing more equitable. And I think that's an important step we have to take. That Sentencing Reform Task Force was shut down 2 years ago. As your next Attorney General, I promise you I'm going to bring it back because that work is not yet done. This is not mission accomplished. There's a lot more work to be done, and there's currently no central reform agency for the state of Colorado working on it. There used to be one, the Colorado Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, and I served on that commission for many, many years, and that commission was shut down. It has to be brought back in some form because these can't be political football questions. They have to be objective, independent, data-driven attempts that are successful in improving the justice system, and I'm committed to doing that. Thank you.
All right, last one. All right, thank you both for being here. So my question is, would you support a policy that eliminates absolute immunity for prosecutors in Colorado, allowing them to be sued, especially if they are holding favorable evidence from defendants?
So for me, the answer is yes. And for withholding evidence is a key part of that, because if it's an intentional or knowing act by a prosecutor, I don't think they should have absolute immunity. So my answer is yes. I feel like as a candidate, I should go on and on about why, but that's really the direct answer. What I would say is this, is that when you have prosecutorial misconduct, there have to be consequences. That's true in every profession, and the power of the prosecutors is incredible. So when you think about the impact that we have over people's lives in the justice system, there has to be accountability when there's intentional or knowing misconduct, and I fully support that, yes.
Quick answer, yes. Absolute immunity is never the right answer. Nobody is above the law, especially not a prosecutor engaging in misconduct that could destroy people's lives. Absolutely not. and eager to work as your next Attorney General to address that problem.
So can we give it up to our two candidates again? I think for those of us who have a law background, this is like, oh, this is interesting. I'm taking notes, right? But this is also informative for the community, right? So those of you who aren't even in the background of law, I hope that this was very informative for you and that you can make a decision come January, come November. And I do want to note that we had other people that were invited. So hint, hint, remember those who are not here, you got a chance to hear from the people that showed up, and they showed up for this community. So let's give it up for these candidates. I also want to give a shout out to Sarah Woodson. If you can just stand, she is HD 42 candidate, state representative, who I personally supported and endorsed. So if you live in her district, please give her your vote because I vouch for her. But with that said, I just want to say thank you again to my partner in this, Natasha Gutierrez, the president-elect of the Sam Carey Bar Association. Natasha and I got a chance to connect when she went through our political leadership training for women of color who want to run for office for Colorado Black Women for Political Action. And we hit it off. And the funny thing is we both have really harsh, at times, personalities. And I'm like, that's my homie. Like, we're friends now. So I just want to say thank you for this, and I will let her have the last words and close us out. Thank you again also to Brother Jeff who came, who also definitely represents the community, coming and making sure that the broader community has a chance to hear from our candidates.
And Bianca left herself out. She's also running. She just announced for RTD for her district. So you guys got to vote for her. B for Bianca. She's in B for Bianca. And I want to, District B for Bianca. I want to thank the officers of Sam Carey for being here. The officers and members of Colorado Black Women for Political Action. We also have some of the other classmates from the political action class. And so we are so grateful that you all came. Again, those who came to support us and to give us their voice, we want to support them. And we're just so grateful to our host at Chaluna, and we thank them for allowing us to have this event here. So take some time, speak with our candidates, learn some more about them, and tell them thank you. All right, thanks everybody.
Great to meet you. I was born in Vegas, and there's a disclaimer, but in Vegas.